Okay, Baruch Hashem, we're finishing today all of the halachot of Hashkamat Boker. We started months ago when we started Likutey Halachot. So Baruch Hashem, we have a big merit, a big zchut. Thank you, Shem. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Shehakol Ni'ah Bidbaro. So Baruch Hashem, we have a big merit that we're finishing this section together that we've been working on for a long time. And it's a beautiful ending. It goes like this. Therefore, the essence of leaving Mitzrayim, it takes place at midnight. Like it says in Sefer Shemot. Chatzot halayla ani yotze betoch Mitzrayim. Moshe Rabbeinu says, Kechatzot halayla, like, which we're going to get to in a second, like at the time of Chatzot at night, that is midnight of night, ani yotze betoch Mitzrayim. I'm going to go out from within Mitzrayim. Because the essence of the going out of Mitzrayim, the essence of leaving personal servitude, of leaving spiritual slavery, of leaving the consciousness which has fallen asleep and gone into exile, it's all through the staff of Moshe and Aaron. Shehem bechina tefila bechina din. And this staff of Moshe and Aaron, it is the concept of their tefillah. And not just any tefillah, but just like a staff is hard, it's difficult. You use it to get around in arduous terrain. So too, this tefillah is not an easy tefillah. This is a tefillah where nothing is working out. This is a tefillah when you don't see Hashem in your life. It's at that very moment that you scream out to Hashem, that you pour your heart out to Hashem, when he's completely concealed from you, which is keneged chatzot, midnight at night. So when you pray in that way, that's called a din tefillah. And this is the type of tefillah which is keneged the staff of Moshe and Aaron, that Moshe and Aaron used to do all of the nisim, to create all of the miracles that took place in Mitzrayim. And we know that Mitzrayim, according to Rabbi Nachman, Likutey, Torah Zion, is the place in which there is no miracles. The whole essence of Mitzrayim is meitzarim. It is a place in which there is constriction and concealment, difficulty. That the word meitzar comes from the word tsar, which means suffering. So we see, interestingly here, another connection. That is, when does suffering come into a person's life? When he doesn't believe in miracles. When he doesn't believe in hashgacha pratit, that as soon as a Jew begins to believe in nature, begins to invest in teva, he automatically assumes the emotional state of suffering, which is very interesting. And Rabbi Nachman brings in that Torah, as well as in Torah Tet, the concept of Az Yashir, that we say every single morning that we left Mitzrayim, we went through the ocean. And it says in Az Yashir that the waters covered over the depths, which Rabbi Nachman teaches that the depths represent miracles. Tahom comes from the Lashon of wonderment. Something is bewildering, tahom. So too, the waters covered over the depths, meaning in Mitzrayim, there was no concept of miracles. Everything was keneged teva, was keneged nature. So when Moshe came to Paro and said, I'm taking the Jewish people out, says, who sent you? Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is the concept of Hashem runs the world, Hashgacha Pratis. Paro says, I don't know Hashem, meaning I don't know miracles. And you came to the wrong place to give out miracles, because this is the place of Teva. This is the place of nature. This is the place where we constrict and we conceal and we cause Jews to suffer by having them believe that everything is going according to the laws of nature, according to the laws of Teva. What is it that breaks that? How do we remove ourselves from this suffering? How do we get out of this constricted spiritual space of believing that things are happenstance, that they happen to be? that they go according to the laws of nature. You do it through a din tefillah. You do it b'schut the tzaddik, that the tzaddik himself, even amidst all of the suffering, even in Mitzrayim, that Moshe Rabbeinu himself knows that it's not Paro, and it's not the laws of Teva that are causing the slavery of the Jewish people. It's because Hashem wants it to happen. Because if Hashem didn't want it to happen, it couldn't be taking place. And even though it's coming under the guise of the Egyptian regime, that is, that the Jews happen to be enslaved in a foreign country, Moshe Rabbeinu, because he was such a great tzaddik, he understood that even in that place, that it appears to be, I just have these sociological, psychological, historical circumstances that are causing my suffering. Moshe says, no, it's Hashem. And he's able to pray to Hashem to cause the redemption, that every single time he struck the din tefillah, that he went out and he prayed to Hashem, and through this he brought miracles. But that came b'schut chatzot laila, that ultimately the ikar geula, the essence of the redemption, took place on the 10th makkah, on the final one, which broke Teva completely, the one which broke Mitzrayim, the concept of that we are enslaved here 100%. That took place with the final makkah. That makkah took place kechatzot laila, at midnight, with the din tefillah. That is the staff of Moshe and Aaron. Bechinat, like the pasuk says, "V'ashlech lifnei Paro yehi letanin," that they threw before Paro their staff and it became a snake. Now it's taught that Paro himself was the living embodiment, according to the Zohar, of the Nachash. That the Nachash in Gan Eden manifested himself as a physical being in the form of Paro. So therefore, when Moshe Rabbeinu took his staff and he threw it on the floor, Aaron took his staff and he threw it in the floor in front of Paro, and it turned into tanin. It turned into snakes, meaning it turned into Teva. However, when he took it back into his hand, it's hashgacha pratis. It's tefillah. It's the concept of miracles. Therefore, the essence of the going out of Mitzrayim, the leaving of the consciousness of nature, the consciousness of I'm a slave, I am a victim of my circumstances, that can only take place b'chatzot laila, in midnight. Because midnight, even though it's coming on the midst of the greatest darkness, you're in the ikar of it. Still at the same time, you're moving towards Hayom. You're at the precipice of daytime. That even though you are coming off of the heels of the greatest darkness, it's at that very moment that in one moment you flip. You switch and you start to move into the time that's moving towards daytime, even though it's still externally nighttime. And Chazal teaches and Kabbalah teaches that as a result of that, Chatzot Laila, midnight, is the greatest time to effect tikkun in the world. The greatest time to effect rectification, mending, healing of all which is sick, a mending of all which is broken. That takes place at Chatzot, that even though it's in the midst of the darkness of the nighttime, it's specifically them, because even though on the outside it looks as dark as it's ever been, on the inside, it's the beginning of the mending and the healing towards Hayom, meaning Geula, redemption. And that's the time that Rabbi Nachman admonishes us that we must get up and pray. We must get up and pray for ourselves. We must get up and pray for Klal Yisrael. We must get up and pray for the Beit HaMikdash, because that's the time in which the redemption can take place. Chatzot. And this is what it says in Masechet Brachot. Michdei. Now, Moshe lo yada chatzot emat. Moshe Rabbeinu, he didn't know exactly when chatzot was. Like the pasuk says, ke chatzot laila. It was like chatzot. The Torah does not mince letters. It doesn't mix words. Everything is badafka. Everything is bediuk. Everything is necessary. Everything is exact. So the fact that it says kechatzot means that Moshe Rabbeinu did not know exactly when chatzot was. It was around midnight. So the Gemara, Chazal, the sages, the tzaddikim, they say Moshe Rabbeinu was in doubt about when chatzot actually was. David hayeh hechi yada. But David HaMelech came much later. He was not the one who received the Torah. He was not the tzaddik Yesod Olam. He was not the one who was bringing the Jewish people out of Mitzrayim. He was, so to speak, the manifestation of the Baal Tshuva, not the tzaddik. And yet he knew exactly when midnight was. How do we know that? El David Simana Havelei, because David HaMelech, he had a sign which Moshe didn't have. Kikino ayat talui lamala mitato shel David. Because the Gemara explains that the pasuk in Shmuel says that David had a harp which was hanging over his bed. This harp which was hanging over his bed at nighttime, specifically at midnight, there was a northern wind that came and it would blow the strings of the harp. And when the strings blew, David HaMelech knew that it was midnight, and he would get up immediately and begin to learn Torah. So we see that the whole difference between Moshe and David is that even Moshe, on paper, so to speak, is a greater tzaddik than David. At the same time, David knew one thing which Moshe Rabbeinu did not. When Moshe Rabbeinu knew it was kechatzot, David knew chatzot mamish. Why? Ki b'mei Moshe adayin lo nishlam b'shleimut hatikun shel tafil b'chinat din. Because in the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, that the exile was not going to end permanently. That we knew, like when Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, tell them my name is Eker Asher Eker. Tell them my name is I will be what I will be. Which Chazal explain means that just like I am redeeming you now, I'm going to redeem your children in the future. Which is to say that this is not the final redemption. This is the redemption that is going to manifest in the future and become the final redemption. This is, so to speak, the microcosm of the redemption. This is the module which we are going to replicate in the future. But this is not the final redemption. Therefore, as a result of that, Moshe couldn't know when Chatzot was mamish. Because if he did, he could have brought the Geula, but it wasn't time. Because the Tikkun was not complete in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu. Therefore, Moshe did not know when midnight was. And therefore, he couldn't completely manifest. He couldn't master the concept of tefillah completely, like David could. Because afterwards, there's still going to be suffering. There's still going to be exile. And we know, says Rabbi Nachman, that the Mashiach Sikenu, through the power of his perfected tefillah, by his acquiring this mastery of the area of speaking to Hashem, he is going to be able to affect the worldwide cosmic Geula. But because there's going to be Galut after Moshe's Geula, he could not master it. He couldn't know when midnight was because the Tikkun wasn't done. The fixing which took, of the breaking which took place at Shvirat HaKelim, that even before creation, there were vessels that broke and the sparks of godliness which were stuck, meduvak, they were attached to those shells, they were attached to those klipot, they were attached to those vessels. They weren't ready to all be released completely. Therefore, he didn't know exactly when Chatzot was. And it's the knowing of when midnight is. That is where tefillah is drawn from. About David, but David, the Baal Tshuva, the one in which he himself falls to the lowest darkness, that he does not see Hashem in his life like Moshe saw him, that he lives in a generation that's much further from the revelation of the Torah. It's much further from the revelation of the clarity of good in the world, that everything seems to be like tohu and chaos. And he himself is falling into that place, to that lowest place of the ultimate suffering. David, who Mashiach? But David's the Mashiach. That he merited to this tefillah. He merited to tefillah in its complete perfection. And it's through the fact that he merited perfected tefillah in the way that Moshe couldn't, because it was not time yet for Geula, whereby David, it is time for Geula. And as a result of that, David is the Mashiach. So therefore, he now gets tefillah completely, because like we learned in the past, the ability to perfect tefillah comes from da'at. However, in the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, da'at was not whole, it wasn't complete yet, because da'at comes from, consciousness comes from rectifying all the sparks which fell into creation. And because there were still sparks that were yet to be drawn up in the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, which he was attempting to do with the Erev Rav, which Joseph attempted to do with the Mitzrim, which Abraham attempted to do with the Gerim. So as a result of this, tefillah could not be whole, because it's only when all of the sparks are finally released from the sides of the klipot, and these sparks come together and they manifest as what's called da'at, the living manifestation of God consciousness, because the soul of every single Jew or Baal Tshuva or Ger, they all come together to create this culmination that's called da'at. And only when da'at is perfected, is whole, can tefillah be mastered. In the times of Moshe, it was not so. And therefore, it was not time for Geula. This is the real reason why Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to take Erev Rav out. And Hashem didn't want him to, but he allowed him to. Why did Moshe want to? For good reasons, because he knew that tefillah could not be perfected until Erev Rav, meaning these lost sparks that were trapped in these dark places could be taken out. But it wasn't time yet. However, when David came, the zchut of the fact that he was sent down to the lowest possible darkness, to the place in which Hashem was completely concealed, that there is no feeling at all in which there is good in the world anymore, that there is peace in the world, that there is love in the world, that there is unity in the world. It's just complete suffering. You don't see Hashem at all. It's a chastar pato chastar. It is a concealment within a concealment. But because David is sent down into that place, he knows exactly when midnight is, because he lived it. He lived in the darkness. And he can sense now when the light was about to turn. Like it says in Tehillim, to gird your thighs, or to gird your sword in this case, al yarech, on your thigh, gibor, gird your sword upon your thigh, this mighty warrior. And the pasuk also says, Amim tachtecha, nations under you, yipalu, they're gonna fall. Belev oyavei hamelech, the hearts of the king's enemies will be pierced by arrows. What is this sword? So Rabbi Nachman says in the second Torah of the Likutey Moharan that the sword in which that David is constantly referring to in Tehillim, the sword in which we refer to by Yaakov, that he took over Shechem and he gave over Shechem to Yosef and gave him this power of the sword. Rabbi Nachman explains based on Rashi that entire koach of the sword is actually the koach of tefillah. That when the Chazal speak about, when the tzaddikim speak about, when David HaMelech speaks about, when Tanakh speaks about the sword of the Jewish people, it's always referring to prayer. It's always referring to tefillah. We see this as well with Benjamin. that they, so to speak, were called the greatest warriors out of all the 12 tribes. Comes Rabbi Nachman to teach, this is the reason why the Beit HaMikdash was in the place of Benjamin. It was in the space of Shevat Benjamin that was in Yerushalayim. Why? Because the Beit HaMikdash is the place of prayer. So too, what's the reason that David has this sword? Because he's the warrior. The warrior means that I'm fighting suffering. I'm overcoming challenges in my life. I am breaking through concealment and I'm revealing godliness in those places. That's what makes you a warrior. This is the reason why Rabbi Nachman says that a person cannot call himself an Ish Melchama. He cannot call himself a man of war unless he breaks through every barrier in his life and he arrives and lives in the land of Israel. Until the point in which he breaks through every barrier and he enters into Eretz Yisrael, because the Gemara in Masechet Brachot says there are three things that can only be attained through tremendous obstacles and suffering. Those are Olam Haba, the place that's Kulo Tov, that's completely good. That Rabbi Nachman says the reason why we call it Kulo Tov is only because there's no language in which to describe its essence. That even when we say it's completely good, that's actually limiting what Olam Haba is. It's just the greatest thing we can think of. It doesn't actually touch at all the place of Olam Haba, which in fact is, the eye has never seen it. So too, the Torah is something which cannot be obtained as well without going through tremendous isurim, obstacles, difficulties, challenges. That a person who wants to acquire Torah must do so through extreme self-sacrifice. And ultimately as well, finally, that is Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, which on paper, it's just a place. Rabbi Nachman says, don't be fooled by the land of Israel. That even though in some ways it looks like every other land, it feels like every other land. You experience it. They have the same gasoline as every other gasoline. They have the same cars as every other cars. They have the same food as every other food. They have everything there that everybody else has. Rabbi Nachman says, do not be fooled by the land of Israel. Because even though the land of Israel might appear to be just like every other land, it is nothing like any other land. So too, Rabbi Nachman compares this to the Tzaddik Emet. That even though the Tzaddik Emet might appear to be mamish, a simple Jew, that you see him and there's nothing that appears to be anything unusual about him, anything extraordinary about him, still he is nothing like any other person. He has moved beyond the domain of Adam and he has entered into the realm of Tzaddik Emet. Because he, says the Zohar, is connected the land of Israel. So too here, this land of Israel, Rabbi Nachman says, is the concept of Emunah Shlema. It's the concept of perfected prayer. It's the concept of, I have acquired the sword of Tefillah, the one that creates miracles, the one that destroys all enemies, that breaks Teva, that breaks nature. V'chen pasuk, and also the pasuk in Tillim that it says, Matei uzecha, Yishlach Hashem mitzion. The staff of your strength, Hashem is going to send out from Zion. What is the staff of strength that David HaMelech is referring to? That at the end of times, it's referring to the days of Mashiach, the Geula, in which all of the souls are going to be removed from the other side. And they are all going to form together to form the staff of strength for the Mashiach. That the Mashiach is going to come out of Zion and he is going to have the power of Din Tefillah. That David is going to come from Zion and he's going to bring the Geula. Shemevi Sham Be'atorah, that it's brought there in the Torah, Le'inyan Tefillah. What is this staff of strength that's going to come out of Zion? It's Tefillah. Ne'amar Ikaros al David Mashiach. And it's said that this is the essence of David, who's the Mashiach. Shalab Ne'amar, that on him it said, Ne'um Hashem la'adoni shev lamini ad eshit oyavecha adon l'raglecha mateu zecha. that says Hashem, that my master says, sit on my right side, ad ashit oyavecha, until I make your enemies adom l'raglecha, the footstool for your feet. Mateu zecha, the staff of your strength. Meaning to say that Hashem was promising David that in the end he would come back and he would be the Mashiach, that King David would reincarnate. The soul of David would reincarnate. He would come back as the Mashiach Tzidkenu. And you're going to sit at the right of Hashem, meaning to say that Hashem is going to give him the staff of strength. That is, he's going to give him perfected prayer, perfected tefillah. And through that, he is going to make all the enemies of the Jewish people collectively and personally, individually, psychologically, spiritually. He's going to destroy all of those enemies, all through the koach of tefillah, which only he will have because he's coming at the end of time. Because he's coming at the end of time and all of the rectifications have taken place. Like the Lubavitcher Rebbe has said, which is very fascinating, that the tikkunim are done. There are no more tikkunim to do anymore. It is now only the times of Mashiach. The Mashiach has to come and take hold of the sword and bring the geula b'schut tefillah. Ki hu yigmor geula b'shlemut. Because he, meaning tefillah, it's through that which he brings the geula b'shlemut. Ki hu yoshev lemin Hashem yiparach. Because David sits at the right of Hashem Yiparach. Because even though in his lifetime he goes through tremendous suffering, which appears to be the left side of Hashem, still b'schut of that, Hashem promises is, don't worry, it's not in vain. Because at the end, b'schut of the fact that you went through all that darkness, you're going to sit on my right side. Meaning you're going to have the koach of tefillah. You're going to be able to reveal Yamin, that Rachel named her son Ben Oni, the son of my suffering, the left side. Comes Yaakov to say, no, he's Ben Yamin. He's the son of the right side. Because Yaakov understood that even though right now he is the cause of all your suffering, at the end he's Yamin. He's the cause of perfected prayer. That only comes b'schut of the darkness itself. Ad yashit oyavav adom raglav. Until all of the enemies become your footstool. And that's the reason why David was able to perceive the time exactly of midnight in the way that Moshe Rabbeinu was not able to. That he awakened, he aroused through tefillah. Because the koach of Moshe, says Rabbi Nachman in the is Torah. And the koach of David is tefillah. And because the koach of David is tefillah, he knows when midnight is mamish. Because midnight is the time of geula, and geula comes only b'schut tefillah. This is why the Arizal teaches, and his main student, Rav Chaim Vital, that in the final generation, the main avoda will not be the learning of Torah, but it will be tefillah. What's the reason he said that? Because the Arizal teaches that the main destruction of the klipot, the main time for tikkun, for elevation of these souls, the lost Jewish people, the lost converts, the lost Baalei Tshuva, who are amidst the klipot, who are amidst the nations of the world, and their consciousness is mamish sleeping. When are they able to come out of that place? The main time for that is b'schut tefillah, is in the time of tefillah. And we need for all of them to come back to affect the geula. And therefore, this is the domain of David. And that can only be had in the time of darkness. Because Torah is a time of understanding, it's a time of light, it's a time of perception, it's a time of clarity. But tefillah is a time of building relationship. It's a time of trying to become intimate when you don't know the partner. It's a time of trying to connect when the other partner is hiding himself from you. And you do that by speaking to him. It's a process of bringing closer that which is distant. That can only be had by David, where he lives in a time of concealment within concealment. And this is why the pasuk itself says, David kinor yatalui lamala mitato. וכיוון שהגיע חצות לילה, רוח צפונית מן השבת בו, והיה מנגן מעליו. And this is why it literally says on David, that Chazal say, David had a harp which was hung over his bed. The moment midnight arrived, the north wind would blow upon it and the harp would play itself. This refers to Haniguna Nifla, the wondrous song which is going to be revealed in the future. The song in which Rabbi Nachman explains in Likutey Moharan is this one-fold, two-fold, three-fold, four-fold song. The Shir Chadash, the song of Mashiach, the song of Geula. That was the song which was played on the harp of David every time at midnight, which would awaken him. It's drawn only b'schut tefillah. Which we know that Rabbi Nachman explains that a song comes only from darkness, because the only way to play a song is to take the good notes from the bad notes. It's to take the positive and to lift it up from the seemingly negative. That's the only way to make a song. That's how you take strings and you take notes from an instrument. To make a song, you have to pick the good notes from the bad ones, so to speak. So as a result of that, David was the master musician, not Moshe. And it wasn't because he was a wondrous physical musician. It's because David lives in the darkness. David lives in the nighttime. And it's taught by the Kabbalists, it's taught by the Hasidic masters, that in the final generation, all of the souls, the Arizal says, which are in that final generation will be sparks of the soul of David. They will be sparks of the soul of Mashiach. And that's why we all relate and connect so much to this paradigm, because we are all, so to speak, living manifestations of this on a miniature level in our own personal lives. And it's through our own, so to speak, activating and manifesting the Mashiach within us, the David within us, that we do not allow ourselves to succumb to the darkness in our life, that we do not give in to what appears to be complete servitude and suffering and slavery. But instead, like Rabbi Nachman teaches us, a zamra, find the song in that place, find the good in that place, lift up all of the godliness which has been trapped, because that's the only reason you're there. The only reason that a Jew finds himself in that place is because there is godliness which is in that place, which only you could reveal. And that's why you have been sent there. It's not because you're Nebach that you're there. It's because you have Koach. It's because you are an Ish Milchama, because you're a man of war and potential. It's because you can pray. And that's why he was aroused through this northern wind specifically, because the concept of the north, says Chazal, is the concept of Gevurot. It's the concept of judgment. Like it says in the Pasuk, that Ra came from the north, that evil comes from the north, that suffering comes from the north, concealment comes from the north. Because the word tzafon also means hidden. Bechinat tefillah bechinat din, which is the concept of tefillah, the concept of din. Many people say right now that the Mashiach himself is in the land of Israel. He's in the north. The deep secret of this is that he's coming from the north, means he's coming from the darkness itself. He's coming from the midst of the pit of Gehenna. He himself is going through the greatest darkness, and it's through his elevating and emerging from that place. The redemption is coming from the north. David comes from the north. And that's why David knew when midnight was. Which is the essence of chatzot. Because this chatzot, because chatzot is the essence of the arousal from sleep. It's the awakening from constricted consciousness. This is the concept of the Geula, which is a complete flip. When you go from exile to redemption, when you go from sleep to a state of being awake. Ki hagalut nikra shena, because the entire exile, all of the years in which we have suffered for thousands of years since the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, really even going back to Mitzrayim, that the Kabbalists explain that really from the times of Mitzrayim until the coming of the Mashiach, it's really one long redemption. comes Rav Natan to teach us it's really one long state of sleep. Cheshkat Laila, the darkness of night. V'ge'ula nikra hitaruro teshena. And the ge'ula is called the arousal from sleep. Like it says, then Hashem awoke like one who had been asleep. This pasuk is coming to teach about when Hashem comes destroyed the police team in the time of David, that he awoke, so to speak, like he was sleeping, even though he wasn't really sleeping, but it appears like he's sleeping. So too, we say in Birkat HaMazon, especially if you're Ashkenazim, or if you're Sephardi and you say Tikkun Chatzot every night, or if you're a student of Rabbi Nachman and you say Tikkun Chatzot, you will see that there is the Tehillim, the parak, which speaks about that we were like dreamers. What is that referring to? It's referring to the end in the days of Mashiach, that we're going to see that this entire exile was like one long state of sleep. We were sleeping. And because of this, and all this, the power to wake up from sleep, the power to arouse redemption, personally, individually in your own life, collectively in the nation of the Jewish people, cosmically in the universe, is all by means of the din tefillah. It's all by means of the prayer in the time of darkness. That this power is most potent, it's most aroused at the midnight. That from there is aroused the voice of the song. That is the song of the future, the song of redemption. The Kino Shel David, the song which came from the harp of David. Ayedei Ruach Sifonit, that all came through the koach of the Ruach Sifonit Daika, that came from the energy, that came from the experience of the north specifically, that came from the suffering Daika. And through this davka, and through this specifically, he knew when Chatzot was. And even though when he got up then, and he would learn Torah, that when we get up and we do Chatzot, like the Zohar tells us many, many times over, like Rabbeinu Zal, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, our Rebbe admonishes us every night, please get up for Chatzot and do this. Because what you're doing in effect is you're awakening your own Geula. You're awakening the Geula of the Jewish people. Because what David did on his individual level by studying Torah at night when the heart blew at midnight, meaning in the midst of the suffering, instead of going into mode of victim, into mode of here we go again, into mode of I'm done, my life is cooked. It was at that specific moment at midnight that he found the good, that he did a Zamra, that he saw the Torah, that he saw the good in that place. And we do the same thing when we get up and we say Chatzot. Be'ezrat Hashem, b'schut this lesson that we have really started with a Zamra, and we are now finishing with the din tefillah. It's all one concept, Rav Natan says. It's all one ikr. That through the concept of finding the good in the darkness, by leaving at the beginning, at the outset of everything, that whatever is taking place is from Hashem, and therefore there must be good there. Like it says in Tehillim, and Rabbi Nachman brings down, that in the constriction, there is an expanse, meaning that through the suffering itself, there is a widening of your life. You just don't see it yet. But because you know that, because you know it comes from Hashem, and it's not coming from nature, because you know that it's Hashgacha Pratit, and it's not coming from some physical, historical circumstance, that it's not coming from your people, places, and things which we are constantly afraid of, that we're worried about. It's coming from Hashem Yiparach. So you must know that the difference is that there has to be good in that place. And because now you know that there's good, you're going to search for it. You're going to claw for it. You're going to scream out to Hashem. And you do it at midnight. And it's in the b'schut of this, it's the merit of this that you bring your own personal geula. And we bring the collective geula. And the Mashiach Tzikenu, that David is able to come at the end. He's able to come out of Zion, and his staff of strength is able to bring the redemption without lifting one hand, without shooting one weapon. That through all of the Jewish people getting up at midnight and doing chatzot, meaning that in the midst of the darkness and the suffering of all of our personal lives, we don't fall for the concealment, but we attach ourselves to those true tzaddikim who tell us it's Hashem, to have emunah, to believe in the fact that this is truly good and not to give up. That it's b'schut of this that the tefillah, the weapon of the Mashiach, is built, and he is able to sweep over the entire world only through the koach of his mouth, that he's able to bring the geula through his sword of tefillah. We should see it soon in our days, b'mirav yameinu. We should see the Mashiach mamish. We should see the geula all in our lives. And Bezrat Hashem, it's through hikashrut to true tzaddikim that we do that. It's through learning this Torah and bringing it practically into our life, to take this inspiration which we get from this wondrous Torah of Rabbi Nachman, through this incredible exposition of Rav Natan, that we now take it into our hipodedut, that we get up at midnight and we cry out to Hashem, that we will see the redemption, we will see the geula, we will see the Mashiach soon in our days. Anybody have any questions? Any questions? You can write it at the bottom. You could say it out loud, whatever you would like. Okay. Everybody have an amazing day. Tonight, we are going to be starting a brand new Torah in Likutey, Torah Vav. This is a big Torah. It's a doozy. Bezrat Hashem, every man should be there in person. If you are in Queens, at Od Yosef Chai. If you are not, and you are a woman or you're not local, then you should watch on Zoom at 9 p.m. And Bezrat Hashem, we're going to get even closer to the Ein Sof, even closer to Hashem Yiparach. The schut of the tzaddik is Olam. David, you have a final comment before we end here?
At least two. One is like David Melech.
I can't hear you. Try to make yourself a little bit louder or chat it on the bottom.
Can you hear me now?
Very faintly.
So what I'm trying to say is that David Melech, he knows when chatzot is. It's because he overcomes his suffering, right?
Yes.
And also, like, we all know that Safon means north, also, and like you said, that Safon means hidden. Same thing like by on Pesach, we find the Afikoman, Safon.
Beautiful, David. Very nice. Beautiful. Okay. Everybody have an incredible day.